Hello, students. Today we're going to talk about something incredibly important. Imagine having to make sure that over 1 billion people have enough food to eat every single day. That's a huge task, isn't it? So how does our country, India, manage this? Let's take a closer look at India's food security system.
First, let's just think about a situation. What would happen if, one year, the crops fail because there was a terrible drought? Or maybe there was a massive flood that destroyed all the fields. What do you think would happen to the amount of food in the markets? And what about the prices?
That's right. If there's a shortage of food, the prices would shoot up, wouldn't they? This would make it very, very difficult for poor families to buy even basic food items. Now, to prevent exactly this from happening, our government has a special system in place. You can think of it like a safety net to make sure everyone has food, especially during these difficult times.
All right, so here's what we are going to cover in our lesson today. First, we'll understand why we even need such a system. Then we will learn about something called a buffer stock. It's very important. After that, we'll trace the journey of food from the farmer to the government's warehouses. Then we'll see how this food reaches the people who need it. And finally, we will also discuss some of the challenges in this system. Okay, so let's start with the first point. Why do we need this food security plan? Well, when there is a natural calamity, like a drought or a flood, the production of food grains in the country goes down. This leads to a shortage of food. And as you know from basic economics, when supply is less, prices go up.
Now, if a situation like this is not controlled, a food shortage can lead to something much worse, starvation. And if many people face starvation for a long time, it can turn into what we call a famine. A famine is a terrible catastrophe. In fact, India faced a very tragic famine in Bengal in 1943, where millions of people died. The system we have today is designed to make absolutely sure that something like that never, ever happens again.
So how does the government solve this problem? Well, India's food security system has two very important parts. You can think of them as two strong pillars. One is called the buffer stock, and the other is the public distribution system, or PDS for short. Let's begin by understanding the first one, the buffer stock.
So what exactly is this buffer stock? The easiest way to think about it is like a big savings account, but for food instead of money. It is a reserve stock of food grains, mainly wheat and rice, that the government buys and keeps in storage. The main purpose of this stock is to make sure there's always food available, especially during an emergency, and to help keep prices stable. It is our country's food safety net.
Okay, so the government has this huge reserve of food grains. But a good question is, where does all this grain come from? How does the government build up this stock? Well, the whole process begins with our farmers.
There's a special government agency for this job. It is called the Food Corporation of India, or FCI. Now, what the FCI does is, it goes to those states that grow more food grains than they need, what we call a surplus. States like Punjab, Haryana, and Andhra Pradesh are good examples. The FCI buys the wheat and rice directly from the farmers in these states.
Now, this is a very important point. The government doesn't just buy the grain at whatever the market price is. Instead, it announces a price before the sowing season even starts. This pre-announced price is called the minimum support price, or MSP. This MSP acts as a guarantee for the farmers. It gives them income security and encourages them to grow more crops because they know they will get a fair price for their hard work.
So, after the FCI buys the grain from the farmers at the MSP, what happens next? Well, all that food grain is then stored in very large warehouses or granaries that are located all over the country. And this stored grain, this is what forms our buffer stock. It is kept ready just in case of an emergency.
All right, so the government has bought the grain and it's stored safely in these granaries. But how does this food actually reach the people who need it, especially during a crisis? This brings us to the second pillar of our food security system that I mentioned earlier.
So let's imagine there's a food shortage in some area and the prices are starting to go very high. This is when the government steps in. It will release some of the food grains from the buffer stock into that area. When more food becomes available in the market, it helps to bring the prices back down and make sure everyone has access to food.
And how does the government distribute this food? The main way is through the Public Distribution System, or PDS. The PDS is a huge network of special shops. I am sure you have heard of them. They are called ration shops. It is through these ration shops that the government distributes the food grains to the poorest sections of society at a very low, subsidized price.
So now we have two different prices to remember, and it's important not to get them confused.
First, there's the minimum support price, or MSP. This is the price the government pays to the farmers when it buys the grain. Then there is the issue price. This is the subsidized price at which the public, especially poor families, buys the grain from the ration shops. And this issue price is always much, much lower than the market price.
Now, this whole system has been a big success. It has helped to prevent famines and has made sure food is available for everyone. But as you can imagine, running such a huge operation is not easy. It has its own set of problems and challenges.
Let's look at some of these challenges. First, just storing so much grain costs a lot of money. The transportation and warehousing costs are very high. Another big problem is wastage. Sometimes the grain can rot in the warehouses, or it might get eaten by rats and other pests. Also, if the grain is stored for too long, its quality can go down. So managing these big warehouses efficiently is a really tough job.
So let's quickly revise the whole process in 3 simple steps. Step 1 is procurement. This is when the FCI buys grains from farmers at MSP. Step 2 is storage. These grains are then stored as a buffer stock in government granaries. And step 3 is distribution. The stored grains are then sold at a subsidized issue price through the public distribution system. Simple, right?
So you see, this system is like the backbone of our country's fight against hunger. It helps protect the poor people and also supports our farmers. But as we just discussed, it's not a perfect system. And that leaves us with a very important question to think about. How can we innovate and improve this vital system to make it even more efficient and effective for the future?